Welcome to the panel. Video game music is lying to you.
Did you just do woo?
Yeah, whatever.
No. It's already started.
I'm Autumn. I've presented here a few times. I'm joined by my two idiot friends, Steven and Terrence, and David, the lovely. There's no favoritism here. I got my degree in philosophy, focused on aesthetics and Eastern philosophy, so I talk a lot about art, music, things like that. I was gonna go for a PhD for that, but then I found out you don't make money, and that's kind of hard to do. So I changed a little bit, but still doing this. Steven, what about you?
Could have changed more, by the way. Hi, my name is Steven. I have done some reading on musical philosophy and theory. I've also had 9 years experience playing music myself. I play the saxophone, trumpet, euphonium, and a little bit of flute. And I'm really good at doubling and tripling down on opinions, so sorry in advance.
Not sorry.
My name's David. I read a book about philosophy, that one right there. I used to play the clarinet, and I'm the panel's dog expert.
It's important, trust
It'll
us.
come up.
That's relevant. That's relevant. I'm Terrence. I've read like 3 books, and I don't know anything about music, making me entirely unbiased, and my opinion's therefore correct.
It's insane what he's told me like the past few months about music.
There's a reason there's 2 people between him and me.
So, let's kick it off. We're gonna have to do a little bit of mumbo jumbo, but to start, everybody's at least heard music, right? We've all listened to it.
Okay, that's good.
I like the enthusiasm.
That's good. That's a good first step.
Everyone's felt like emotion when listening to music, correct? Okay.
Can we get a little more
This guy actually
certainty
said
here?
no when I asked him that. He's like, I don't get it, and I was blown away. I was like, you're on the panel now. The people need to know. But when we talk more intimately about it, you start to run into a few questions that sound really simple on the outside, but start to get a little weird when you look at them closely, such as, is the emotion in the music itself? Which already has the problem of what format is the music, right? Like, is it the sheet music? Is that music? Do you feel emotion when you look at the little dots and lines? I like this guy. Or is it just inside of us? Are we feeling the emotion? The music's just kind of like a blank canvas for us to project that. And I don't know if we're going to reach too many good answers, but I think looking at it more intimately, we can start to understand maybe the function of music in video games, which you probably think you know. I don't. So, how do we start this? We should probably talk about philosophy of emotion and music, right? That sounds like a good idea. So,
No, I don't think we should.
when I say a person is sad,
Shut up.
thank you. When I say a person is sad, it's not the same as saying a song is sad, right? A person experiences sadness. You know, they feel sad. Whereas if I say a song is sad, the song doesn't feel anything. I didn't hurt its feelings. It's a piece of music, right? So even though we use the same word sad, we start to notice it doesn't mean the same thing. So we should probably get a vocabulary, some words to use that help people understand what we mean. So to start, we're gonna look at the idea of a simple and a complex description. So psychology back in the day said colors have emotions in them. They were like, yellow, that's a happy color. You look at yellow, you feel happy, right? When you tell someone something is yellow, how do you point to it and explain to them that it's yellow? You kind of just go, it's yellow. What do you mean? Just look at it. There's not much else you... What?
No, it's brown.
Shut up. Then you're like, you're insane. It's yellow. That's all you can do. That's because yellow is simple. You can't point out anything. It's apparent. It's got one dimension to it. Whereas music, it's complicated, right? It's complex. I say, oh, a song is sad. And they're like, what? Why is it sad? And you're like, oh, well, look, it's in this minor key. It's got this diminutive chord. It moves this way, that way. Listen to like the slower tempo here. And you can point to individual points. Don't look at that. And that is how you can tell something is sad. And this isn't like some mystical, like, thing that people don't understand, because composers themselves have rules, ideas. They know this stuff, and they use it to compose. They know what makes people feel a certain way. So with that in mind, let's try to look at some theories on why people then have this complex experience with music.
So
One dog guy.
Oh, thank you. So one theory as to why we hear if we hear emotion in music is called the contour theory. So imagine the face of a Saint Bernard dog. It's like sad, it's droopy, looks like he's frowning, right? Oh, he's sad. Aw. But the dog could be excited. The dog could be the happiest little creature in the world. You could have like held a treat up in front of him. He's wagging his tail, but he still looks sad. But the dog's not actually sad. So like, what's sad about that? Maybe it's because it looks like a face that's frowning, like a person. Or when dogs are like panting, it looks like they're smiling and they're happy, right? Which means they're definitely happy all the time. Wrong.
Your dog is not happy all the time.
Not all the time when they're panting. But we see that as a smiling face. So we're like, oh, it's like a happy person who's smiling. So music can do this too. It could do this when it sounds like human speech. Like if there's a piece of music that's like swelling up to a big staccato note and it sounds like it's yelling. It's angry. Or if there's like a sad song, it can resemble human movement. Like if it's at a very slow beat per minute and it's drooping and the notes are just kind of laboring over, it's like a sad person. So in these ways, music could kind of resemble human speech, and then we interpret that as an emotion. But this doesn't fully explain it. For example, we have these things called major and minor keys, and we usually say that major keys are happy and minor are sad. But we don't talk in major and minor keys. It doesn't make much sense in this theory. Like there's no way to resemble that in human emotion, or in human speech and emotion. So it's not perfect. The other important thing to say about this, if you care for people who know, this is not a representational theory. It is a resemblance, not a representation of emotion.
If you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of a philosopher, aka the coolest people you know, you use those words.
Oh, what's the difference?
There's books on this. It's highly talked about.
Are you trying to start a fight?
A little bit. These?
Anyway, so if that theory is not perfect, let's try a second one.
So a second theory on how music makes you feel emotion is the belief theory. Now, this is a little bit more of a general theory. You have your object, you have your belief, and then that produces a feeling. So a good example of this would be, say, if it's raining outside. Now, if this is the 5th day it's been raining and your basement is flooding, you're probably not happy that it's still raining outside, and you're thinking about how much money you're gonna have to spend to fix your basement. That is a belief. You believe that that rain should make you feel angry or frustrated or sad, whatever. But it's important to know that that's that belief that produces that feeling. Because if it was raining, but it was after 3 months of drought, you'd probably feel very differently about that rain in that situation.
That's how it feels in California, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. So the object hasn't changed. Your belief about the object has changed. And wherever that belief can come from. And this example, it comes from experience, but you could also have been taught to believe that something corresponds to something else, similar to how language works, where the word mad refers to an emotion. But you don't learn that through experience, you're taught that by people around you so that you can communicate with them. Music works in the same way. In the case of music, the object is the music itself. And then you have beliefs about how you should be feeling about that music. And once again, that belief can come from anywhere. It can come from the situation you're in. That's something you'll hear people talk about, like the our song theory.
We'll get to
the
that.
situation you're in. Or you, as we were talking about earlier, we know that major and minor keys are supposed to correspond to certain emotions. So we hear that music and we go, oh, the director, the composer, whomever is trying to convey this emotion to me. And I believe that they are trying to convey that emotion to me. So now, because of that belief, I will feel that emotion.
Yeah, as it says also on the slide, there is also a certain type of pleasure from recognizing this and going like, emotion. Because like, if you feel sad, no one really wants to feel out feeling sad. It feels bad, right? So even if a song is sad, there's still pleasure in experiencing that song and going, oh, I'm experiencing a type of sadness. Last dry slide, I swear. It's a lot of emotion talk, but it's important. You'll see. As Terrence was saying, we have the other problem, especially with the theory we just talked about and the beliefs, that your emotional state and situation can kind of affect the way you experience music. So let's say you had a really happy song and you listen to it all the time with your ex. Now that happy song is really sad because it just only reminds you of them. You have the R song phenomenon. Anybody seen Casablanca? There's not many. It's okay. Okay,
all right.
It's more than I was ready for.
I was about to get upset.
Don't look at that.
Yes.
So there's a moment where a character tells someone to never play a song because of its emotional situation for him. The song doesn't have that emotion in it. It's purely because of that guy's experience that makes that song feel the way it is. Same with the emotions I was talking about before. You don't feel those for real. If a song makes you scared, right? Like maybe you hear like a little like, and you're like, oh, this is distressing, right? But you're not like running out of the room, throwing your headphones down, like afraid for your life. It's a pseudo fear. And then the final thing is that music's quality has no effect on whether or not you feel emotion. There's a ton of like incredible pieces of music, not very emotional. And there's also a ton of like incredible emotional music and vice versa. So feel free to hate whatever you want despite emotions, okay?
That's right. That's the real message of this panel. Hate music.
You gotta stop at that.
We know where you lie. All right, so
I got your room number.
now that we've talked about emotion a ton, let's talk about it and get towards video games. Was this the one you wanted to do, or are you the next one?
Next one.
Okay, cool. So music's been around forever, and it's also been applied to multiple different forms of media. You had operas, which included stage acting. You had silent film, which had like a little guy on the organ playing like the Monty Python intermission song. TV, and games. Now, music should have a function in all of these. Hopefully it's the same. It's hard. You might think you know, but the more I keep talking about this, the less I can figure it out, because it seems really obvious, but it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good, as you'll see.
Okay, so we're gonna start with explaining the music's filmic function, which is very close to games itself. So music has always been tied to films as a medium ever since the day of the silent film. So back in the day, with silent films, you had these images projected onto a screen that, you had actors playing out emotions on there, but there was nothing in their timbre, nothing in their voice to tell you how they were feeling. So you could see a frame of someone looking at something frightening off in the distance, but maybe it wouldn't resonate that much because A, you can't see it, and B, their eyes can only do so much. They might flash up a big slide that says like, oh no, period, on the screen after that, but that doesn't tell you much. So you would have this guy sitting there on the piano playing some music to sell that scene alongside. And what that's doing is filling an emotional gap. It's bridging a gap between the film and the audience to help it resonate more deeply and emotionally. Once sound was added to films, the music still remained because the same gap still exists.
That's kind of weird. You'd think once they added sound, actors could act and scream and yell. It's kind of weird. Yeah.
Oh shit. But no, so the gap still exists once you move into this medium, and this even during loud scenes, like music still exists in those. And this is because, again, that gap, while it's narrower, it is still there. You could have people playing very muted emotions that don't quite come across, especially in some films like Paul Thomas Anderson or something. But you have music there to back it up and tell you and reassure you of what you're seeing on the screen and help you sympathize with it more.
Sounds pretty good. That's weird though, because like that means that you think music's in movies just to make you feel an emotion like forcefully. Like they think you're not smart enough to read the scene.
Yeah, that's actually
Oh
what I'm saying.
no. Oh no. Now I think the original cynical reaction to this is like, oh no, I hate film music now. It's just a trick. But also if it was a trick like that, you'd think like someone like the French or someone crazy would be like, oh, we're gonna make no music movies, and it would be this huge artistic movement. But that didn't happen. Plenty of art film exists today, and it pretty much all has music. Maybe a little less than normal, but it's still there. So whatever gap the music is filling, it's not just to make up for the emotions they think you're not feeling. I'm not sure what it is, but it's there. And I think we're a little closer to understanding. Oh no, that's not.
There are some of you will probably be able to. Well, probably maybe not. But there are movies that don't have music in them. One of the more famous examples is like The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock. Did I say that right? Whatever.
Yeah, you got it.
But that serves to emphasize in that movie there is a lack of music to emphasize how not normal it is. It ends up being this exception that proves the rule that music is part of film and hopefully part of video games. And the other half of it is that we know that these movies do exist. So we were talking about with some crazy French director who would come along and go like, oh, I love that this film doesn't have any music in it. And they would just run with it for a while because they'll film anything over there.
It's high art because no one told me how to feel, said no one.
No, yeah, says no one ever.
No, I agree with that though.
Oh, okay,
Anyway,
only.
on to video games, which is why we're all here. So I had a lot of people tell me, because I've talked about this with a lot of people, that video game music is like an integral part of games. And I always start out bringing up that the first games and a lot of early games, no music, you know? You boot up Pong, you just hear beeps and boops, and that's a video game. So you can make a game without music. It's not integral, technically. But then as games develop, you get like Pac-Man. You put a quarter in, hear the little, you know? I forgot how Pac-Man goes. Oh my God, I feel bad.
Move on. Cut. Keep
But
going.
video games have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Video games have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Video
long
games
way.
have come a long way since Pac-Man.
I actually disagree, but that's not
Anyway. So we have this thing where, just like film, music was suddenly added to video games, and the question is, why? You know? Like, sure, in Pac-Man, it's a fun little beep and boop, right? But does it provide any artistic purpose? And this is the problem. Also, I do want to point out, I had someone correct me like yesterday. I made this slide a while ago. Apparently, the Grammys now have video game music, so ignore that last point.
Ignore it. Do not
Kinda
look
cool.
at it. Look away.
We don't count the VGAs. So what makes video game music what it is? Because I'm sure everyone has a soundtrack in mind they're thinking of where it's like, oh, well, this one, that's the one, and that's the one we hate the most, okay?
Yeah, especially you.
But I have like a bit of a hypothetical, which is like, everyone knows the Mario theme, right? Iconic. If the Mario game didn't exist, would people still love that song? Would it even be known by anything, or is it just because of the game, right? It's kind of weird. There's not really a huge emotional quality to it outside of it's in a video game, right? So it doesn't seem like it's equivalent to the emotions, but it starts to become its own our song theory, like we talked about before. Yeah, we're bringing it all back. I hope you were awake. So what do those two theories teach us about music? You have your belief that you're feeling an emotion. So like, let's take Undertale. Everyone knows Undertale. We love Undertale. If you listen to that music on its own without the game, would it still have that emotional feeling that you felt? I had a friend who said yes. They were like, oh, I heard that soundtrack before the game, and I felt really emotional. But then they also said that it was because they were going through a rough time in life. And I was like, uh-oh, this sounds like an emotional situation.
And it's also important to note that if you're listening to the music on its own, not only does it give you emotions, but does it give you the same emotions as you would have had if you experienced it in the context of the video game.
Not to mention, games get in a weird spot where it's like Hotline Miami, those songs existed before that game. They got added after the fact. So, but even then, I was talking with this guy here, and I was like, oh, wait, like, does anybody care about spoilers for Hotline Miami real quick? I know it's an old game. Okay, cool. So you get to the end of that game and you're like supposed to be like, well, what the heck is the point of all of this? And you just get to a guy who's like, what do you mean? It was fun, wasn't it?
So it was their intent for you to feel like a cool guy, and you're
Yeah.
looking for a different meaning. It's like, no, you get it. You
No,
felt like
it was
a cool
fun
guy.
killing all these people in like a murder ballet, right? And I think the music artistically contributes to that. Like it creates that feeling of, oh yeah, I'm having fun. This is great. So I think that's like kind of a plus for video game music, honestly. Like that kind of changes the music itself because it existed before, right? So I guess the thing is that we kind of hit an impasse here because I don't have a solid answer, honestly. I know it's a little disappointing, but it's kind of how philosophy is. I'm sorry. We ask a lot of questions, but I think in conclusion, we can all agree that you should stop listening to music.
Stop it.
It's a trick.
That's 3 out of 4 of us. That's not.
Okay, loser.
Say it into the mic, coward.
I did. It didn't pick it up.
Say it again.
But yeah, so hopefully even though we don't have a definitive conclusion, you can at least now reflect more on what you listen to, why you listen to, maybe even get a little bit more attached to it. Hopefully it brings a new dimension. I know a few people I've talked to said that, and that felt really good. Otherwise you become like me and you hate music and you're like, I hate this. Yeah! Stupid directors think I can't feel emotions. Yeah? I'll show them. Anyway, it's Q&A time, I guess. Thanks for paying attention through all that.
And if you weren't, that's okay too.
We take
Did it. You survived.
Good time, too.
Yeah, good time.
No, I started that late. It's like 1:23. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I will try to answer them. Okay. You shut up
Middle back.
first. Wait, middle back?
No. Which one are we doing?
Who do you think's in charge here?
You pick one.
Let's vote.
We'll
Let's
pick
vote.
middle. We'll pick middle.
Do you want to?
Did you want to come up or wait?
Sorry about that slide.
It's fine. We recovered.
Dang, everybody's got some
You brought your C game. All right, ask it and I will repeat it into the microphone.
I have a question. When video game composers, you talked about like, or composers of video games, like their intention to inspire emotion and compositional techniques. When I've like looked at scores and learned about how video game composers approach it, do you have any opinion on like how much of it is intentional, how much of it is like subconscious? Because like with the you study music for long enough, certain tropes are like instilled into you. So like, what's the balance between like what's intentionally targeted composition versus subconscious?
Okay, so since it's a little loud, the question is that how much do you think composers in video games are purposefully using these techniques versus it's incidental? I would say it's 100% on purpose. If you look at like composition, I think it's like kind of well known now. It's like pop music, right? They know how to make really vague music that you can really like just go like, oh man, like they're like, oh, it's that person at that time, and you listen to it and you're like, this is about me. me, right? Like they know what they're doing. Don't let them act like, oh, well, I don't know, that's an accident. At least that's my opinion. I don't know if any of these people differ on me. Nice question, though. Thank you.
Hi, sorry if this opens up only again more.
That's fine.
Do it.
That's right. Do it.
It's a philosophical conversation, I don't know if I'm weird. How do you think a role of major or mild synesthesia plays into understanding music? Because, listening to a sound effect may convey a color to some, or like the swapping of senses. This is like way too much at once.
Honestly, I'm not sure.
Say the question. Say the question.
So-
I guess it also depends on the framework you want to use. Like that doesn't.
Repeat the question. Repeat the question.
Oh, I'm a fool.
So you're asking how much like synesthesia and swapping of senses along with the music.
Yeah, because you're obviously trying to generate an emotion. When you put things in TV shows, movies, and music, and video games, you're trying to use that music to manipulate. But how much of that is, your brain specifically using synesthesia, where it's trouble conveying different senses? When listening is so integral, but it also conveys, like you mentioned earlier, colors, having an emotion for no reason, and generating that disassociation with how, yellow is just a color, but now it's a feeling.
One, I do know psychology has moved on from it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
They don't believe yellow is a happy color by default. Yeah, I know. They have like their masters in psychology, they know. To be honest, I'm not sure. I don't have synesthesia, so I've never seen a sound. Like sometimes I wonder, because I love music secretly. Don't tell anyone.
I would honestly kind of file that under the R song phenomenon a little bit, because if you have because you have synesthesia and you make those connections between color and other senses, that's something that's internal to you and your life, and that can affect how you perceive different sounds. It's a very individual thing, yeah.
I would think, by the way, that there's probably some music composed by people with synesthesia out there that are meant to convey those certain like experiences or sensations, but unfortunately it doesn't affect most of the population. So any other things I would think are mostly incidental.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, first off, great talk. Second, what's there to be said about, say like more general, less emotions and more of like grand ideas that comes from music. So less about like, oh, that makes me fearful, and more of that song makes that character exude power, or like this gives a sense of like gravitas to the scene. What does that just come from? Because I was having a debate with my friend about this. Does this come from like instrumentation mainly? Like what, the composition versus the instrumentation versus the actual like nitty-gritty of the actual music? What plays the biggest part in trying to hit an emotion within a scene? Like, obviously there's no rule of thumb, but at least like, what's your guys' thought process on it?
Well, instruments definitely, I guess like your question is, aside from emotions, how does music, I guess, okay, because you bring up instrumentation, right?
Yeah.
How does music convey other ideas?
Yeah, like power, grandiose.
Yeah, power, grandioseness. I think those are all kinds of feelings, honestly. I use the phrase garden variety emotion, which I didn't this time. I'm a little upset, but I didn't want to be boring. And the idea is that there's emotions that we know garden variety, like happy, sad, scared, angry. But there's a whole like spectrum of emotions that humans feel that always don't have words. And like grandiose is like feeling like someone has power. I think you're spot on that there are definitely instruments that do that. Like I think like a big brass section, like definitely usually is used for someone who's got a lot of power, right? You can always do like volume and things like that. I think that's why I think we talked about emotion especially, is that like these are all feelings that you feel, and the music is trying to do that. So technically it's an emotional gap, I guess. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, but,
So,
oh, sorry.
so in terms of your question, in terms of instrumentation and composition, I actually don't think there's much of a difference in those things because, you know, when you're writing composition, you would pick the right instrument for the emotions you're trying to convey, right? So think like Peter and the Wolf, which is a good demonstration of that. You know, they have like the oboe playing a very light and flighty character, whereas they have like for the wolf, I forget if it's like a trombone or tuba, but they have a,
The French ones, I think, yeah.
French horn, yeah, they have a brass instrument for that. So if you're trying to convey different emotions in your instrumentation and composition, those are the same thing. You pick the right tool for the right job, essentially.
Okay, so it's like a smaller follow-up question, which is, can you use the same instruments throughout, say, an entire game, an entire movie, and still convey those specific emotions? Like, say you had a small band that you were able to work with. Could you still get those same feelings across with the limited instrument pool that you have, or does that become more of like a kind of get hard stuck into this feeling?
I think people loving things like Game Boy music, which has such a limited amount of sound, shows that you can do a lot of emotion with a little bit. It's not always, it may not have been as good if they had a full orchestra, right? But I think you can use limited amounts and get creative and create something still.
I
It goes
think-
through a gamut of emotions.
Yeah, I think Toby Fox's, we talked about it, Undertale is a good example of that. It's almost entirely electronic music, but he's using like basically one instrument for that, right? But the types of notes he hits between, say, like Metroidvania or like
Megalovania.
Megalovania or something like a,
Asgore's theme.
Yeah.
sure, that one. I don't know the soundtrack by heart. Screw me. But
You hate Undertale, I know it.
Can't believe that Steven.
Yes.
Can't believe Steven hates
But
music.
no, but it's the same instrument, right? It's a synth, but like he's creating different notes with it that create different emotions.
The one other thing I want to say too is that this guy who wrote this book, Kivy, I forget if he was making this argument or if he was paraphrasing someone, but he said that music can only convey garden variety emotions, like what Autumn was talking about. And I think it speaks a lot to how much we fill in the gaps with things like our song phenomenon or with contour theory, that we bring our own beliefs into it, and that can shape the smaller, more subtle things, even if the music itself doesn't portray it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Okay, you will say the first term hasn't been the church it's said, what I think it's a trend now games, and I don't like it.
Oh, the trend of anti-music?
Yeah, in games. I don't know. I mean, games without actual like big scores.
I mean, it depends. I think it depends what you want. I was talking to someone about this the other day. Like you play Tarkov, and that's already like someone either hates me or loves that I brought that game up. I hate it, but I remember it fondly. But if like you get into a round of Tarkov, there's no music. And it's like the most stressful, anxiety-inducing thing you've ever touched. I feel like if there was music in it,
Half of the time. Even through breath of the wild, score. Just kind of sell this whole thing.
he was just talking about that the other day.
Yeah, I was going to mention Breath of the Wild because there's really just not much score there for the most part. There's just like some flips on the piano. And maybe they're trying to convey like this is a world where there's not much happening. Let's just do it. Right, yeah. You kind of notice it, right? And notice the lack of it, which is interesting.
Yeah, I don't really, when I think of Zelda music now, I really don't think of Breath of the Wild. I usually think of like the older games where it's like,
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, random stranger.
Hello, I'm here to be a problem.
Good.
All right, so I actually got thinking about this one. It's a different question than I usually have with you guys, and I figured it'd be fun to present. So you mentioned that there's no movement of people like trying to make films or games without
No music.
But I have noticed, because you know me long enough, my brother is a film buff. He has gone out of his way to find movies, like short films and otherwise, independent films, without dialogue. So trying to take a different element out and trying to convey everything with just the visuals and music. Thoughts?
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
There's definitely, since like early Russian film, the idea that showing one picture and then another picture should convey most of the emotion and thought has definitely been a thing. I think that almost proves the rule even more that the crazy experimental filmmakers who are trying to take something out of a film and convey emotions don't take the music out. It's kind of weird, but excellent point. Yeah, this silent. Yeah, you know, they got the. That's what I would play. Thank you. Hello, other random stranger.
Hello. So, what do you think would be needed to, I guess, push video game music in the right direction now?
Okay, so the question is, what do you think would push video game music in the right direction? That's an interesting question. You'd first have to answer what's the right direction.
Pass.
Right? Because, like, there's already music people love near and dear. Is that a bad thing? I don't think so. But if you're someone who's like, oh, it needs to be high art, well, maybe. I don't know, honestly.
Well, I think
Video games never become any form of art in the first, right?
Who's to say they're not already there, AKA last year's panel?
Man, if only there was some panel out there on YouTube from MAGFest.
I bet someone really cool talked about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I have an interesting question. I think it's interesting, I would hope. So say there's a video game that has the soundtrack with it, the launch, let's say, like Ocarina of Time, for example. And if you hadn't listened to the soundtrack beforehand, then you just somehow managed to delete the soundtrack from the game and just play it as if, like out of the box, like just play Ocarina or like even without the soundtrack, and then playing it again, like which one would be more enjoyable? Which would you remember more? Like like what would happen if there were no music versus if there was? Just if you played it with or without.
So your question is, what would it be like to play a game like Wind Waker without the music?
Yes, the first time, without actually knowing that there's any music, and it's just, then you play it again with the music. So what would?
I think it'd be a confusing experience, actually.
God, the sailing would be so boring.
The sailing would be pretty boring. We actually did, when we were setting up this panel, we did a lot of talk about the context that music lends to certain scenarios in video games. And one of the ones we talked about was town music, the music that plays when you enter a town to let you know that this is a safe, tranquil area, that you're not to expect combat, that you're mostly going to be shopping and talking to strangers. So imagine, if you will, you're out in Ocarina at the time, you're out in the field, you're being attacked by skeletons or whatever's out there right now. And you walk into a town and it's just the same tone. It's still night out. There are people there. Are they hostile? How do you know that? And the music helps convey that particular emotion. So to answer your question, if you were to play without music first, I think it would be a confusing experience. It'd be hard to tell what's going on a little bit, as opposed to playing it with music.
I would put up as a counterpoint to that is that we kind of know what that looks like, because that's much of Death Stranding. For most of the time with Death Stranding, there are moments where music plays in Death Stranding, but for the majority of the time that you're walking through from place to place and just trucking, you're just out there on your own, just walking.
I want to answer your question.
Are there sound cues that tell you, though, if there are BTs in Death Stranding?
Let David speak.
I'm sorry, I'm really mad at him right now.
I can yell about Death Stranding later, okay?
And lots of people talk about it. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to answer your question with my head. And you don't have to answer it right away. And that is there a difference between video games that were made with music, like Ocarina of Time, and video games that weren't made with them in the first place?
Well,
what's the difference?
I would think it's mainly because like obviously the composer and the maker of the game decided, let's put music in here to either make it force emotions or to, like, intend to express emotion. And if that's not there, then let's say, I'm sure it's not spoilers, but let's say you're in the first dungeon of Ocarina of Time, and there's just nothing, you just hear nothing. It's just like sound effects of like normal actions, like rolling around and all that.
It sounds spooky.
Yeah,
It does sound, how many huts and palace can you manage to?
You just see a thing, and it's like there's, like that's the point. Like,
Right, what's
a game like Tetris, well, not even Tetris, like Pong. Does Pong have any music?
Nope.
Okay.
Just bloop, bloop.
Pong doesn't have music and it's intended to, so it would be kind of not the like that's already happened. That's already the default case, I suppose. Like, I just more curious if you were just saying.
Is that intention or limitation?
That's another question.
What a good question. They did it anyway. Honestly, it just makes me think, I wish I could share it. I don't have it readily. Has anybody seen Seinfeld with Twin Peaks music? It changes everything. It's insane.
It does.
Distinction of whether it has or does not have music. I figured most of it that time it's intended. People would intend to have music.
Yeah, most people intend to have music. I think swapping it out for nothing probably makes things more eerie. I think people, a cool philosopher named Adorno, if anybody knows him.
Oh my goodness. Not again.
Talks about how a lot of artsy stuff is quieter and popular stuff is not, because a lot of people, when they hear silence or quietness, get nervous or anxious. And they don't want their audience to feel that, right?
Right.
So I think mostly just taking music out of something makes it eerie or boring. I don't know how long I could sail in Wind Waker with like no music. Like,
I think you mentioned Tarkov earlier as
Yeah.
an example of a game without music, and that's a very eerie game. It's meant to feel tense throughout, and the lack of sound really helps convey that.
yeah, the sound of that game's stupid. You hear a gunshot and you're just like, you let go.
You want to crawl out of your screen, yeah.
Yeah.
But what you're going back goes back to like the filmic purpose of music, where it's like, okay, now that in a video game like Call of Duty, where there's a lot of sounds and gunshots, everything, there's also a cool guitar riff in the background, and like it's still
Hell
there, even though
yeah.
it doesn't need to be.
You go, brother. But I think that's a good question, honestly. Thank you. Wow, look who's come crawling back.
Look who's come for seconds.
I just wanted to ask, what do you think of like music used as a mechanic in video games? Like, we all know kind of the basic example, which is like what was Legend of Zelda games, where it's got the threat music of some enemy is nearby. But like, there are some video games that go deeper into the mechanics of music.
One, I wanted to stay away from rhythm games, because that just like it feels like its own beast.
Music is the mechanic there.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think it fills a gap of you don't know this is a danger until like the Skyrim like starts playing, right?
But then there's also games where they're like, brother, there's an enemy right there.
You're on fire, brother. It'll pass.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So-
like every 10 seconds.
So why doesn't everyone just do that instead of have music?
Because it's way better to just have like a little string, like trill.
Yeah, that's why my go-to example of working mechanical like music in video games is Rainbow, because of how the threat music is dependent on like how much the enemies have noticed you, what enemies are present, how many there are, and stuff like that.
Sorry, what's Rain World? I haven't heard of this game.
I'm not surprised.
Stop advertising Rain World. No one plays it. Apparently we all should though. Thank you. Next question.
So we brought up the idea of the existing
music in games eventually with Online Miami. But it got me thinking of the our song theory and stuff like that, or that idea. And I guess my question is that cheapening when used in a video game? And my two examples where I think it's been very good and very cheap, Metal Gear Solid 5, the cover of The Man Who Sold the World, versus if anyone has been able to finish the new Pokemon games, technical things aside, the very end is an Ed Sheeran song that made me want to kill myself before the game could do that with graphical problems. So, and that's because of my pre-existing conceptions of having bad experiences with Ed Sheeran songs. So as soon as his voice came up, I was like, this game can die. So, is it a cheap trick that video games should avoid? Because obviously all media does it, but is there robbing something even more with video games being much more interactive at face value in comparison to watching a film or watching a movie?
So your question is video game music lying to you?
Well, yes.
To respect the kayfabe we've set up, I would say yes. I think it cheapens it greatly to blast emotion in my face because you think I'm too stupid to feel it. Composers are jerks, you know. I also really love music. Don't hurt me, I'm sorry. But yeah, I think, to be fair, there are probably composers that do that as a cheap trick, 100%.
It applies to movies too. Think about the Guardians of the
Especially
Galaxy.
movies. Yeah. How many TV shows gotta end with credits coming up with a pop song suddenly playing?
Everyone ends on a freeze frame midair.
And there's definitely a difference between blasting a music because a producer thought, oh, we need the person to feel sad, so let's play a sad song. Here's one I heard on the radio. Versus like, yeah, Hotline Miami is a good example because they actually try to do something with that and make it a part of like the bigger art piece that is that game, along with like its gameplay and its visuals and everything else, where it actually feels like a part of it.
Yeah, I think that's one thing you bring up that's important to understand is just how collaborative making these things is. So making a movie, there's so many steps along the way where someone could have just went, nah, you should put this in there. Like, everyone knows about Blade Runner having a Harrison Ford like voiceover, right? Where a producer's like, the audience isn't gonna understand this movie. You Harrison Ford, you should talk over the movie so they can understand. And he made sure to do the worst job possible so they didn't take the cut. So he's like, sushi, that's what my ex-wife called me. Cold fish. For 2.5 hours. And then that didn't happen because the producer saw it and went, oh wait, this is bad. So I think with video games too, maybe the original designers didn't want it, but then someone came along and went, no, you should put that. I don't think they'll get it. We did test audiences and they were confused.
I think in the example of The Man Who Sold the World, I think Kojima did that on purpose.
Oh yeah, Kojima, he does what he wants. We all saw Words That Kill, and then we're just in a Jeep.
Yep.
Man, I watched that trailer so many times. But I think, good question. Thank you. Thank you.
So when you kind of brought up in the one book, possibly the theory about how music can only really create garden variety emotions, because with something like fear or humor, which is usually like considered a very like subjective concept as is, like games typically can create anxiety or tension, and then you really will get that fear moment out of the sound effects themselves. So do you think like when games are being designed that, another example I bring up is like, say, the Phoenix Wright games, where the music is like just kind of vibing, but the actual sound effects of like the objection and then the sting of it, and then you just cut into a completely different song. Do you think like the sound effects themselves could be considered part of the music, because they're effectively considered kind of independent things, because at any point you can press like the A button and trigger the actual objection sound effect, but to convey the actual emotions kind of going into it, or the sting of a jump scare where it gets that really loud like swell, would you consider
them still kind of like independent entities or kind of part of a whole?
So if I could make a statement that's unfounded, because you ask, do you think that sound effects can be part of the music? I would say the opposite. I say you can almost consider the music as part of the sound effects sometimes. Similar to how we talked about combat music, right? That's also kind of a sound effect that lets you know combat started. And like with anxiety, someone called them anxiety noises, where you have like a spooky game that just has like the low bass rumble and like weird creaking, and it's like, is that a sound effect or part of the soundtrack, right? Because it's playing all the time like music. So I think it would almost be the opposite, where you consider the music as a sound effect rather than the sound effect being the music.
I'm gonna half agree there, but I'm gonna say the sound effects could be part of the music.
Yeah, that's true too. I think it can go either way, honestly.
I like the example of Phoenix Wright actually, because there's like a break in the music when the objection happens. You have your like regular music objection, and you have like a sudden tone shift, and I think it really creates an interesting dynamic.
I have a question for you two, which is, what is the difference between the music being part of the sound effects and the sound effects being part of the music?
Go home.
You remember how you wanted to talk about the Dark Tide music, like yelling at you that a horde's coming?
We did kind of.
That's like a sound effect.
Okay.
Because it's signaling gameplay.
Okay, so it's mechanical versus just atmospheric enema.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for that, actually. So I came up here talking about polling too. So when this isn't much of a question, but the same thing that you had brought up about, like, you know, games are obviously a collaborative thing, and his point about like the association with a pop song has to play at the end of this. It goes a lot with polling music too, the cheapening of even something as simple as an impact. You think about the punch sound effects, and someone hitting someone is just like this really dinky little slap, even if you get slugged really hard. And I watched a documentary based on Foley where it's, no, you're not just going to have that slap sound effect. That might be in there just for that association, but you're also going to add like a bone cracking sound effect or a muzzled shotgun blast, and this like reverberating bass that would never exist, and just playing into that one single sound. And it's very similar to what you're talking about with music, just tugging at our emotions just to get the association out at a quick, but obviously music has a much longer time to sell that, but with each bit of Foley, every single sound effect is adding layer to layer to layer in a much shorter time. And just kind of, we just kind of guided that in there, so thanks for that. But it's, yeah, it's just a whole cheapening of a collaborative effort, and the question comes back.
Okay.
But because of what he said, Rhythm Heaven, you tried not talking about it. So
I love Rhythm Heaven.
I love Rhythm Heaven, but you listen to the song, right? You love the song, you're in the moment, right? You get your bum-bum-bums and all that. And then you listen to the song because you're like, oh, I love that song, let me pull it up on YouTube or something, I want to listen to it, and the sound effects aren't in there. And you have this big disassociation, you're like, this song doesn't sound right, it don't happen.
Song sucks.
It's, yeah, right? I want that damn shit.
If you like Rhythm Heaven, you should check out the demo for Bits and Bops on Steam. It's not out yet. It's just Rhythm Heaven.
I believe there's a panel on Rhythm Heaven tomorrow as well.
It's already on mine.
We don't know the person running it. It's crazy.
We don't.
Melatonin too.
Yeah, I was actually going to check that out. I haven't played that yet.
When I played the demo, kicked ass.
Hell yeah. Thank you. Hello, stranger.
Hello, strangers. So,
Oh shoot, is that Ninja?
yeah, oh my god. This panel and these conversations kind of got me thinking about my favorite sound design as it pertains to music in particular, just in games that I've played. And there's lots of great examples, I'm sure. The one that kind of stands out to me is from a small game called Heard of the Outer Lines. And I'll avoid spoilers as much as possible. If anybody in here hasn't played, you absolutely should. But at the end of, you notice at the end of the first loop, right? There's like, I don't know, it's a dozen or so notes that themselves, maybe they're a little melancholy, maybe they're a little somber, which fits with the themes of what's happening. But in and of themselves, right, like your Mario example, it's not like some grand, magnificent composure, right? It's a really small 30-second thing. But that happens over and over and over and over and over again, and my pattern-seeking brain is taking these notes, attaching them to
the cool things, the sad things, all of the emotions I'm experiencing through the loop, attaching to that sound. And then when you reach the end of the game, and it reaches...
Careful about spoilers for that game.
When it reaches the end of the game, and it plays those same notes, but pitched up slightly, almost like a major key and a happy key, it's a real, like, oh shit, this is the end moment. And it turns it from kind of a sad thing to a happy thing, like just through the pattern of that music. Right? That's really cool. And I don't really have a question to spin off of that, but
I do. I think, so you bring up the use of music in Outer Wilds. So my thesis about Outer Wilds, right, is about connection and loneliness, that game is, right? And the various ways we can achieve that. So I think the moments that game has where you experience like the people playing instruments, it's not a spoiler, you'll find those people like 2 minutes in. And they're always alone, and they're just like playing their one instrument. It's very lonely imagery, right?
Yeah.
And they're across the galaxy going, oh, well, I do this so that way if people point their scanner here, they know I'm still here, right? And then you get to the end and you're hearing all the instruments together, and you're like, oh man, oh man, this game did it. That's a good game. I don't know if that's a cheap trick. I think that's a really smart use of imagery, sound, and theme.
yeah. I mean, I would say it's the opposite. It's a very well earned trick.
Yeah, controversial. Outer Wilds is really good, guys. Yep, 5 minutes. All right, thank you. Next.
So, admittedly, I didn't get to see the entire panel, but I had an interesting question about how you would think about music that's kind of just like for the background, not exactly like to bring out emotion, more of just to enhance the gameplay itself, because a game like Myst or something like Ribbon, maybe like a puzzle game or something like that, it's not exactly adding to the emotion of the game. It's more of just background, or to just at least have a thematic element to the world rather than to just create any sort of emotion for that game. So I'm curious what you might think of that.
So the question is, what about like Myst or puzzle games where it's not, I want you to feel happy or sad?
Yeah.
Are you feeling something when you hear it?
I mean,
you're probably feeling, you know, like awe at the mysteriousness of it, or in the background. If I was more cynical, I'd be like, how dare you make something for me to not listen to and just play in the background? But then I'd hate Brian Eno. So I think even creating background noise, you still have a feeling in mind and an idea of what you want them to feel. Just like the anxiety sounds I was bringing up. It's in the background. You're not supposed to just sit there and analyze it, but it's there so you feel something.
I find music like that often makes me feel very meditative and sort of tranquil, which helps me focus on the puzzles.
I feel sleepy.
Sleep. That's on you.
It is.
All right. But even like, despite like it's just really like a theme that's just kind of like a thematic, just to make sure like, just so you know, this is the rocket world, or this is the tree world, or something like that. So, but it's still like a motif, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they still want you to feel something. They're probably not making a background noise and going, I hope they feel nothing, you know?
So your homework is play a puzzle game and pay attention to the music and think about what it's doing for you.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I think we're out of time, just in time. So thank you all for staying through the Q&A. Thanks for coming to the panel. Have a great con, everybody.